Welcome to Learn English channel. In English, grammar is an important factor that must be given top priority. Understanding and using correct English sentence structure is important in conveying meaning accurately and effectively. This is a great video to improve your English, so subscribe to our channel and start your English journey. Thanks a lot. Let's begin.
He is determined enough to achieve his goals.
He is determined enough to achieve his goals.
He is determined enough to achieve his goals.
Anh ấy đủ quyết tâm để đạt được mục tiêu của mình.
He is patient enough to deal with difficult people.
He is patient enough to deal with difficult people.
He is patient enough to deal with difficult people.
Anh ấy đủ kiên nhẫn để đối mặt với những người khó chịu.
He is dedicated enough to achieve his goals.
He is dedicated enough to achieve his goals.
He is dedicated enough to achieve his goals.
Anh ấy đủ tận tâm để đạt được mục tiêu của mình.
The argument is compelling enough to convince anyone.
The argument is compelling enough to convince anyone.
The argument is compelling enough to convince anyone.
Cuộc tranh luận đủ thuyết phục để thuyết phục bất kỳ ai.
He is tall enough to reach the top shelf.
He is tall enough to reach the top shelf.
He is tall enough to reach the top shelf.
Anh ấy đủ cao để chạm tới kệ trên cùng.
She is brave enough to face her fears.
She is brave enough to face her fears.
She is brave enough to face her fears.
Cô ấy đủ dũng cảm để đối mặt với nỗi sợ của mình.
They are experienced enough to handle the situation.
They are experienced enough to handle the situation.
They are experienced enough to handle the situation.
Họ đủ kinh nghiệm để xử lý tình huống.
The water is deep enough to swim in.
The water is deep enough to swim in.
The water is deep enough to swim in.
Nước đủ sâu để bơi.
He is quick enough to catch the bus.
He is quick enough to catch the bus.
He is quick enough to catch the bus.
Anh ấy nhanh đủ để kịp bắt chuyến xe buýt.
The rope is strong enough to hold the weight.
The rope is strong enough to hold the weight.
The rope is strong enough to hold the weight.
Dây đủ mạnh để chịu trọng lượng.
She is skilled enough to play the piano.
She is skilled enough to play the piano.
She is skilled enough to play the piano.
Cô ấy đủ tài năng để chơi piano.
The stairs are steep enough to be careful on.
The stairs are steep enough to be careful on.
The stairs are steep enough to be careful on.
Cầu thang đủ dốc để phải cẩn thận khi đi.
The car is fast enough to win the race.
The car is fast enough to win the race.
The car is fast enough to win the race.
Chiếc xe đủ nhanh để chiến thắng cuộc đua.
She is organized enough to manage the project.
She is organized enough to manage the project.
She is organized enough to manage the project.
Cô ấy đủ có tổ chức để quản lý dự án.
The weather is warm enough to go for a swim.
The weather is warm enough to go for a swim.
The weather is warm enough to go for a swim.
Thời tiết đủ ấm để đi bơi.
He is confident enough to speak in public.
He is confident enough to speak in public.
He is confident enough to speak in public.
Anh ấy đủ tự tin để nói trước đám đông.
The dog is friendly enough to approach strangers.
The dog is friendly enough to approach strangers.
The dog is friendly enough to approach strangers.
Chó đủ thân thiện để tiếp cận người lạ.
She is resourceful enough to find a solution.
She is resourceful enough to find a solution.
She is resourceful enough to find a solution.
Cô ấy đủ sáng tạo để tìm ra một giải pháp.
The mountain is high enough to touch the clouds.
The mountain is high enough to touch the clouds.
The mountain is high enough to touch the clouds.
Ngọn núi đủ cao để chạm tới đám mây.
The room is spacious enough to accommodate a large group.
The room is spacious enough to accommodate a large group.
The room is spacious enough to accommodate a large group.
Phòng đủ rộng để chứa đựng một nhóm lớn.
She is talented enough to perform on stage.
She is talented enough to perform on stage.
She is talented enough to perform on stage.
Cô ấy đủ tài năng để biểu diễn trên sân khấu.
The book is interesting enough to keep my attention.
The book is interesting enough to keep my attention.
The book is interesting enough to keep my attention.
Cuốn sách đủ thú vị để giữ sự chú ý của tôi.
He is flexible enough to adapt to changes.
He is flexible enough to adapt to changes.
He is flexible enough to adapt to changes.
Anh ấy đủ linh hoạt để thích nghi với những thay đổi.
The movie is captivating enough to watch repeatedly.
The movie is captivating enough to watch repeatedly.
The movie is captivating enough to watch repeatedly.
Bộ phim đủ cuốn hút để xem đi xem lại.
They are strong enough to lift the heavy box.
They are strong enough to lift the heavy box.
They are strong enough to lift the heavy box.
Họ đủ mạnh để nâng hộp nặng.
The water is hot enough to make tea.
The water is hot enough to make tea.
The water is hot enough to make tea.
Nước đủ nóng để pha trà.
He is clever enough to solve the puzzle.
He is clever enough to solve the puzzle.
He is clever enough to solve the puzzle.
Anh ấy đủ thông minh để giải bức tranh ghép.
She is kind enough to help her friends.
She is kind enough to help her friends.
She is kind enough to help her friends.
Cô ấy đủ tốt bụng để giúp đỡ bạn bè của mình.
The movie is exciting enough to keep you on the edge.
The movie is exciting enough to keep you on the edge.
The movie is exciting enough to keep you on the edge.
Bộ phim đủ gây hứng thú để giữ bạn ở bờ vực.
He is patient enough to wait for the results.
He is patient enough to wait for the results.
He is patient enough to wait for the results.
Anh ấy đủ kiên nhẫn để đợi kết quả.
The cake is sweet enough to satisfy your cravings.
The cake is sweet enough to satisfy your cravings.
The cake is sweet enough to satisfy your cravings.
Bánh ngọt đủ lượng để làm hài lòng khẩu vị của bạn.
She is organized enough to manage her schedule.
She is organized enough to manage her schedule.
She is organized enough to manage her schedule.
Cô ấy đủ có tổ chức để quản lý lịch trình của mình.
The coffee is hot enough to warm you up.
The coffee is hot enough to warm you up.
The coffee is hot enough to warm you up.
Cà phê đủ nóng để làm ấm bạn lên.
The team is skilled enough to win the competition.
The team is skilled enough to win the competition.
The team is skilled enough to win the competition.
Đội đủ tay nghề để chiến thắng trong cuộc thi.
The child is old enough to go to school.
The child is old enough to go to school.
The child is old enough to go to school.
Đứa trẻ đủ tuổi để đi học.
He is generous enough to share his lunch.
He is generous enough to share his lunch.
He is generous enough to share his lunch.
Anh ấy đủ hào phóng để chia sẻ bữa trưa của mình.
The film is captivating enough to hold your interest.
The film is captivating enough to hold your interest.
The film is captivating enough to hold your interest.
Bộ phim đủ cuốn hút để giữ sự quan tâm của bạn.
The house is big enough to accommodate a large family.
The house is big enough to accommodate a large family.
The house is big enough to accommodate a large family.
Ngôi nhà đủ lớn để chứa đựng một gia đình lớn.
He is wise enough to make thoughtful decisions.
He is wise enough to make thoughtful decisions.
He is wise enough to make thoughtful decisions.
Anh ấy đủ khôn ngoan để đưa ra những quyết định suy nghĩ.
She is fast enough to catch the bus.
She is fast enough to catch the bus.
She is fast enough to catch the bus.
Cô ấy nhanh nhẹn đủ để bắt kịp chiếc xe buýt.
He is fit enough to run a marathon.
He is fit enough to run a marathon.
He is fit enough to run a marathon.
Anh ấy đủ khỏe để chạy marathon.
The instructions are clear enough to follow.
The instructions are clear enough to follow.
The instructions are clear enough to follow.
Hướng dẫn đủ rõ để làm theo.
She is patient enough to teach beginners.
She is patient enough to teach beginners.
She is patient enough to teach beginners.
Cô ấy đủ kiên nhẫn để dạy người mới bắt đầu.
He is attentive enough to notice the details.
He is attentive enough to notice the details.
He is attentive enough to notice the details.
Anh ấy đủ chú ý để nhận thấy những chi tiết.
The soup is hot enough to warm you on a cold day.
The soup is hot enough to warm you on a cold day.
The soup is hot enough to warm you on a cold day.
Canh đủ nóng để làm ấm bạn vào một ngày lạnh.
She is determined enough to overcome any obstacle.
She is determined enough to overcome any obstacle.
She is determined enough to overcome any obstacle.
Cô ấy đủ kiên trì để vượt qua mọi trở ngại.
The movie is funny enough to make you laugh.
The movie is funny enough to make you laugh.
The movie is funny enough to make you laugh.
Bộ phim đủ hài hước để khiến bạn cười.
She's efficient enough to complete the task quickly.
She is efficient enough to complete the task quickly.
She is efficient enough to complete the task quickly.
Cô ấy đủ hiệu quả để hoàn thành công việc nhanh chóng.
The beach is beautiful enough to take your breath away.
The beach is beautiful enough to take your breath away.
The beach is beautiful enough to take your breath away.
Bãi biển đủ đẹp để làm bạn ngỡ ngàng.
He is responsible enough to handle the project.
He is responsible enough to handle the project.
He is responsible enough to handle the project.
Anh ấy đủ trách nhiệm để quản lý dự án.
Please subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the latest videos from my YouTube channel. Thank you very much. Don't forget to like and share on YouTube channel for your family, friends, and relatives. Thank you for following and supporting me. Wishing you always joy, happiness, and success.